you just can't adopt the popular opinion that most of the folks around you have, because a lot of times the popular opinion is wrong, okay? Now as I was studying Fidel Castro for years and years, is that Fidel Castro was an attorney. And the president of Cuba, his name was Batista. And he was a puppet of the United States. Because you needed a puppet, because you had Russia, you had all these, because you have communism and democracy. That was always the battleground all over the world. So they were vying for territories that they could call their own. President Batista of Cuba was a puppet of the United States government. The mafia was all in Cuba, making money with the nightclubs, making all kinds of money with gambling and with nightclubs and all that stuff. And the Cuban people were poor as dirt. The Cuban people were being prostituted by the Batista government, who was in bed with America and the mob. And the people were being pimped by all three. And Fidel Castro, who could have led a middle-class, comfortable life as an attorney, chose not to. And through a course of events, a revolution was born. And so what you'll have here is you have a lot of people today, and this is what my daughter was looking at. She was looking at all these YouTube videos, all these people Cubans talking about Cuba. But what I had to express to her is that when you have a situation, well, how about we had President Obama in office for 8 years? And you had like tea parties, you had everybody that was on the other side was ragging on him and hating on him, calling him names, and mad, vitriolic. He hates America. He wasn't born here. Terrorist, fist bump. He loves terrorists and all that kind of stuff. And if you were watching just those videos, you would believe that stuff. So I'm telling a black person this. I'm telling my daughter this. I'm telling this is what I'm saying. So you can't just form your opinion because what you have here is, even with the people that are really ragging on Cuba like that, you have two types of people. Well, when President Batista, a tyrant, was in charge of Cuba, of course there were many families that were benefiting because they were part of that system. So there were wealthy families. There were many families that, of course, maybe a quarter of the nation was benefiting off of that corrupt, tyrannical government. President Batista, who actually was a sergeant in the Cuban army and moved up the ranks, placed as a puppet leader in Cuba. He was a sergeant. I guess that's better than Adolf Hitler, who was a corporal in the Austrian army, right? But anyway. So when the government of Cuba was overthrown by the Castro revolutionaries, who were fighting and hiding in the Sierra Madres. I mean, you should read some books. Get some real history, not just one-sided. Don't get books or history from any one side. Try to read all that you can and then come up with the truth from that. But when that revolution finished, all those folks that fled the country, including Batista, were the people that were benefiting in the Batista government. They fled, so of course they flee to Miami. They're going to hate Fidel Castro because they were living large before they fled that country. And so now their kids growing up in Miami in homes of people who hated Castro, they're going to be taking on that same rhetoric, just like what's-his-face over there who was running for Republican president. I can't remember his name right off the bat, but the guy who couldn't drink that water properly, that guy. What I'm saying is they're, of course, going to have those attitudes because their parents were the ones that were benefiting off of the corrupt Batista presidency who had to flee, so they're going to hate the revolution. So then you say, well, look at all the people that are living in poverty. They're living so terrible, in Cuba, because of the type of political structure that Castro set up. Well, the interesting thing is that Russia was communist, but you have Caucasian communists, and then you have these Cuban, darker-skinned communists. Why is the embargo just against Cuba when Russia is just as communist or worse than Cuba? I mean, come on, you really got to think. Don't let this be another one of those things we just start, without any education or knowledge, just start ranting and raving about. So if it wasn't for the embargo, that the United States has imposed upon Cuba, the people of Cuba wouldn't be so dirt poor. Okay? I said, okay, that's another thing. So then you ask the question, well, what about all the people that are in prison, and tortured and we kind of do that too, right? And our people, half of we the people think there should be torturing, the people that might threaten our country, right? And I'm not saying either way, but I'm just saying, so what are we, blaming the Cuban government about? Come on now. So what you have here is, and I'm pro-America. First of all, I'm military. All my immediate family, my 3 brothers, my sister, my dad, we have 100 years of service just between us, the 6 of us. My dad, myself, my 3 brothers, and my sister. 100 years of service, okay? But I'm just telling you something that, as a black man, we just look at these things just a little bit different, okay? That when you have our country infiltrating Cuba, a lot of times with people who are anti-Castro that fled the country, that are going to go back in there and act like that, so they have this police force set up, secret police, and they are imprisoning people. They are, mistreating people terribly because they're threats against their nation. Now, I'm not pro-Cuba, but I'm saying we just have to look with our eyes open, okay? So even though I'm talking to my daughter, I'm trying to explain this stuff to her, don't jump the gun. And then I said to her, look. You have a situation where there was a Cuban Revolution going on. Say the unrest was probably around the mid '50s and to the early '60s. Okay. The people that demonized the Cuban Revolution, because again President Batista was a puppet of the American government, the people that were demonizing the revolution were the same people that were hosing down black folks in this country. It was the same time that black folks were vying for their human rights in this nation. It was the same time black people were being lynched in this nation. Black people weren't allowed to eat in restaurants, down south. They had to eat in the back door. They had different drinking fountains, different restrooms. School situations were not equal. Black people were being terribly mistreated and beaten and hung and lynched and murdered. Emmett Till, simply for being black in America. At the same time, the Cuban Revolution was being demonized, who were revolting against a Batista president who was a puppet of the American government. So no matter what side of this discussion you're on, you know how easily we have our opinions formed by the media. You have people on the left in this country who are watching MSNBC, people on the right who are watching Fox News. You know people on the internet. We choose what we want to watch because we only watch the things that sort of accentuate our pre-beliefs anyway. So you know how easy it is people to be moved by the media. Imagine back in the 60s when we didn't even have the opportunity to see a full picture. All we were fed was by our government on what kind of individual this Castro was in his revolution. We were the same people that were hosing down and lynching black people at the very same time. So you're going to believe those folks' words about this country when those folks were doing what they were doing to us here. I'm telling you, it just takes some time to pause. What I'm giving you right now is antithesis to your probable thesis regarding your attitude about Cuba or any other country. You're going to find Cuba, as you begin to research the history, even back in the 60s, going into all throughout Africa with doctors and armies, helping people who were being oppressed by Belgium, oppressed by Britain, oppressed by the Americans, and helping them win their freedom. That's what Cuba was doing. They were all up in Africa. Cuba has some of the best hospitals, the best doctors, the best medical schools, and they send free medical help all through Africa, helping all these folks that are suffering from various maladies. So I'm just saying is that nobody's perfect. But sometimes you have to challenge the source. And you have to do your research. And if you don't know if you should challenge your source or not, look at what else your source had their hands in at the same time that you know good and well they were evil. And then ask yourself, would this evil source here that was oppressing black folks in the 60s would have given a proper representation of this revolution that was dethroning the puppet government of these people? I mean, come on. And some folks didn't want to bring up Che Guevara. Ruthless. He was an Argentine doctor that fought with, that was like the second, third in command with Fidel Castro. Now he was some character. But you know, if you're at war, you know, when we go to war into nations, stuff happens. There are ways that wars are won. Now, this is what the Republican right says and the Democrat left kind of argues against. This is why I'm not really political. Because war is war. And if you're going to be in a war, you need to win. But also, if you're going to be in a war, you need to make sure that's a war you're supposed to be in. See, we just got so much confusion going on in this nation, and we're just going to be yelling and supporting and yelling and hating and yelling. We're kind of messed up right now. And so all this came to mind when I was thinking about Winnie Mandela, because those folks hating on her too, but most folks kind of embrace her. But I'm just saying, you know what I'm thinking is, look, what's very interesting is that our nation, which is the greatest nation on this planet, I believe that. And I really do. And I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to be patriotic. I'm just saying, as far as just the fact that I can have a program like this and not disappear. I mean, that's a lot different than another. That's the greatness of this nation. Okay, is that we have freedoms that other nations don't have, freedoms of speech. Now we do have particular citizenry in this nation that would like to, stifle some of that freedom of speech. But that's why I also believe in the Second Amendment. Okay, that's why I'm not on that bandwagon either. I have an AR-15. I have some other stuff as well. I believe that, for me personally, I believe in the freedom of speech, and I also believe in the necessity you have to protect yourself. And I don't want to say because we have the right to form a militia. I just want to say because there's some crazy people out there that might not like what you're saying, and you just have to protect yourself, Let me share this with you too. Something that you might not have realized. Google Malcolm X and Fidel Castro images. And you're going to find them meeting in a hotel Teresa. And what you'll find if you do a little bit of reading is that anytime Fidel would come to the United Nations to speak, you always see him out there ranting and raving to the United Nations. He would always go through Harlem. Because there was no issue between Fidel Castro and black Americans. Because Fidel Castro saw that the black Americans were suffering from the same oppression that the Cubans were suffering from under the Batista presidency. And so there was a commonality between the black suffering folks in this nation and the suffering Cubans in that nation. And that was another reason why this nation was dead set on demonizing Fidel Castro, because the black folks in this nation were beginning to take notes, watching the revolution in Cuba. And then when there was victory, it's very interesting, because what you'll find during that time, you find a lot of black folks that had participated in World War II, that had participated in Korea, that had even participated in Vietnam early on, getting fed up. And they were trained in warfare and tactics and explosives and all kinds of devastating stuff. And the United States government, without uncertainty, this situation with Castro and some of the revolutionary black folks in this nation, the ballot or the bullet type black folks in this nation, by any means necessary black folks in this nation, by Stokely Carmichael, by the black power people in this nation, that it was more beneficial for our government to recognize and deal with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who was known for taking a punch, than to deal with these other brothers who were dead set and intent on shooting back. So I'm just throwing out there that there's another side to this Fidel Castro story, just like there was a side to Nelson Mandela's story and Winnie Mandela, but it was for a means for a greater good. And in the long run, as we begin to look back, we begin to see a clarity of the real situation. And so I thought I'd just drop some knowledge on you today, okay? Now, it would be easy for you just to discard what I've been telling you and just go on believing what you've been believing. But if you have Google at your fingertips, I would challenge you. Challenge you to Google Juan Almeida, who was a black general and under Fidel Castro. And don't forget to Google the images of Malcolm X and Fidel Castro. And then try to read some of the articles. Google President Batista of Cuba. I Googled him the other day when I was thinking about this, and it said, after I had that discussion on Facebook with that guy, and it said, did the United States back the wrong tyrant? Even when you make a statement like that, it makes you think, maybe there's something to that. But anyway, I think I've been to your ear long enough. I do appreciate your indulgence in my rambling. And I want to thank you for listening. I want to invite you to listen again. You take care.